Tonight, we explore the HMX Britannic, the ill-fated sister of the Titanic, tracing her construction, her transformation into a hospital ship, and her final sinking. You stand on the starboard promenade deck of the Manche Britannic. The sun shines directly from the east, casting long, sharp shadows across the yellow pine planks beneath your leather shoes. The date is November 21, 1916. The time is exactly 8 in the morning. The air temperature is 21 degrees Celsius. A steady wind moves across your face at 10 miles per hour, carrying the distinct scent of salt water and the heavy smell of burning coal from the 4 towering funnels above you. You look over the steel railing. The Aegean Sea stretches flat and wide to the horizon. The water is a deep, opaque blue. Small whitecaps break against the steel hull of the ship as the massive vessel cuts through the water at a speed of 20 knots. The ship measures 882 feet and 9 inches in length. It spans 94 feet in width. You lean forward and look down the side of the hull. The overlapping steel plates are painted completely white. A thick green stripe runs horizontally along the entire length of the ship, separating the upper decks from the lower hull. 3 large red crosses are painted on the sides, flanked by rows of green and white electric light bulbs attached to the exterior metal framing. You turn your back to the water and walk toward the interior of the ship. You step over the raised brass threshold and enter a long, wide corridor. The temperature inside drops immediately. The air sits perfectly still. It smells intensely of carbolic acid, bleach, and iodine. You hear the rhythmic, low hum of the 18,000 horsepower steam turbines rotating continuously deep beneath the floorboards. The mechanical vibration travels up through the polished linoleum floor, through the leather soles of your shoes, and into your legs. You walk slowly down the long corridor. The walls are painted white. The ceiling panels are fitted tightly together. Nurses in white cotton dresses and stiff white fabric caps walk past you. Their rubber-soled shoes squeak against the linoleum. Members of the Royal Army Medical Corps wear heavy khaki wool uniforms. The rough wool fabric brushes against your arm as they pass in the narrow hallway. You hear the sharp clinking of metal silverware striking porcelain plates. You follow the sound into a massive ward. It is 8:10 a.m. Row after row of black iron cots line the walls, bolted securely to the floor. White cotton sheets lay flat across the rectangular mattresses. Breakfast service is currently underway. Orderlies in white jackets push-wheeled metal carts down the center aisle. The carts carry large metal urns of hot coffee and thick ceramic bowls filled with cooked oats. Steam rises steadily from the metal coffee urns, heating the air immediately above them. The smell of roasted coffee beans mixes heavily with the sharp scent of the medical disinfectant. You see a large circular clock mounted on the white plaster wall. The black minute hand moves forward with a loud mechanical click. It is 8:11 a.m. Patients sit on the edges of their metal cots. They hold tin spoons and scrape the bottoms of their ceramic bowls. The volume in the room consists of dozens of overlapping conversations, the squeaking wheels of the metal carts, the clatter of spoons, and the steady, continuous vibration of the turbines far below. You watch the circular clock on the wall. The minute hand clicks forward again. It is 8:12 a.m. A massive concussive sound erupts from the lower starboard side of the ship, forward of your position. The floor beneath your feet jolts violently upward. You lose your footing and fall to your knees on the hard linoleum. A heavy pressure wave pushes through the contained air of the ward, pressing forcefully into your eardrums. The sound consists of tearing steel plates, shattering glass, and the immediate heavy rush of seawater. The metal carts tip over onto their sides. Hot coffee spills across the linoleum, pooling rapidly around the iron legs of the cots. The heavy ceramic bowls slide off the carts and shatter into hundreds of sharp fragments on the floor. A thick cloud of gray dust falls down from the ceiling panels, filling the air and coating the white cotton bed sheets. The sharp smell of cordite explosives and pulverized coal dust fills your nose, replacing the scent of coffee and bleach. The ship's forward momentum through the water continues unabated. You stand up and brush the gray dust from your clothes. You look down at the floor. The linoleum surface is no longer level. The deck slants downward toward the bow of the ship. It also tilts noticeably to the starboard side. The vibration of the engines continues humming steadily through the soles of your shoes. The massive bronze propellers continue turning at the rear of the ship. The ship drives forward through the water. Deep inside the lower hull, seawater pours through a ragged hole in the steel plates between holds 2 and 3. The water enters the ship at a high velocity. It floods the forward cargo compartments immediately. It rushes violently into the boilerman's tunnel. It fills boiler room 6. The cold seawater pushes heavily against the steel watertight bulkheads. The ship is mathematically engineered to stay afloat with up to 6 of these watertight compartments completely filled with water. The water continues to rise past the iron floor gratings and over the unlit furnaces. You walk back out to the starboard promenade deck. The angle of the wooden pine planks is much steeper now. You grip the smooth wooden handrail tightly with your right hand to maintain your physical balance. The external waterline is significantly closer to the deck than it was 10 minutes ago. You look over the side. The Aegean Sea rushes past the white steel hull as the engines continue pushing the ship forward. The water temperature is exactly 21 degrees Celsius. The largest British-built ship of the era is actively sinking. You stand securely on the tilted deck. You consider the timeline of the exact events unfolding around you. The sister ship of this vessel, the RMS Titanic, sank in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. That specific sinking took 2 hours and 40 minutes from the initial impact with the iceberg to the final plunge below the surface. This heavily reinforced ship requires drastically less time. The seawater pours continuously through the forward sections. It bypasses the raised internal bulkheads by flowing through the open glass portholes on the lower medical decks. The bow drops lower and lower into the blue water of the Aegean Sea. The massive stern rises upward into the air. The entire physical structure of this 882-foot vessel will disappear entirely beneath the surface of the water in exactly 55 minutes. You turn away from the steel railing and the rising blue water. You walk slowly up the slanted wooden deck. You step backward through the years. You arrive in a formal carpeted dining room in the year 1907. Two men sit across from each other at a polished mahogany table. They look down at large sheets of blue paper covered in intersecting white lines. You stand in a quiet, high-ceilinged room in London. The year is 1907. A heavy, dark wood table sits in the center of the room. Two men sit across from each other. J. Bruce Ismay wears a stiff, starched white collar and a tailored dark wool suit. His fingers rest on a large sheet of blue paper spread out over the tabletop. Lord Pirrie sits opposite him, wearing a waistcoat with a gold watch chain draped across his chest. The smell of pipe tobacco hangs in the air, thick and slightly sweet. A small gas lamp sits on the sideboard, casting a steady yellow light over the documents. The blue paper is a technical drawing. You look down at the lines etched in white ink. The lines define the shape of three ships. The first ship is labeled Olympic. The second is labeled Titanic. The third is labeled Britannic. You trace the scale markings with your eyes. The planned length for each vessel is 882 feet and 9 inches. The beam, or the width at the widest point, measures 92 feet. The height from the keel to the top of the funnels measures 175 feet. Lord Pirrie picks up a fountain pen and points to the dimensions on the paper. He moves his hand across the diagram of the hull. The design includes double-bottomed steel structures. The internal layout features 16 watertight compartments separated by 15 vertical steel bulkheads. These bulkheads extend from the double bottom up to the D-deck. The plans show the installation of reciprocating steam engines to power the two outer propellers and a low-pressure steam turbine to drive the central propeller. The two men discuss the volume of cargo and passenger capacity. The documentation lists provisions for 2,500 passengers and over 800 crew members. You watch as Ismay reviews the specifications for the first-class staterooms. The drawings indicate private bathrooms for the majority of these cabins. The plans for the public areas include a gymnasium, a swimming pool, and a squash court. The dining saloons are marked with dimensions that fill the entire width of the ship. Lord Pirrie slides a second document across the mahogany surface. This page lists the raw materials required for the construction of the three vessels. You see columns of numbers detailing thousands of tons of mild steel plates, iron rivets, and timber for the deck planking. The shipyard at Harland and Wolff in Belfast is the designated location for assembly. The slipways at the yard are currently occupied, but the plans show a timeline for clearing them to make space for the first of the three hulls. You look at a separate sketch provided by the naval architects. This diagram shows the exterior profile of the ships. Each vessel carries 4 massive funnels. The fourth funnel is shown as a dummy, designed to provide ventilation for the kitchens and to complete the silhouette of the ship. You note the height of the superstructure. It rises several stories above the main promenade deck. The plans detail the installation of 16 sets of davits for the lifeboats distributed along the boat deck. The men continue to talk as the room grows darker. The sun sets outside the window, and the gas lamp flickers, making shadows dance on the white plaster walls. You observe the precise layout of the engine rooms, the boiler rooms, and the coal bunkers. The bunkers are located along the sides of the ship, acting as a buffer for the internal machinery. You see the notations for the hydraulic watertight doors, which are designed to be closed simultaneously from the bridge. The conversation shifts to the schedule for the completion of the 3 projects. The shipyard intends to build the ships in sequence. The construction of the Olympic begins first, followed by the Titanic, and finally the Britannic. The document specifies that the same equipment and gantry structures will be used to fabricate all 3 hulls. The blueprints are rolled up and placed into a leather tube. Ismay and Peary stand up and shake hands. You remain in the room after they leave. You look at the final design schematics one more time. The label on the last vessel shows the name Britannic in bold block letters. There is a faint, crossed out line of graphite near the name on the original draft suggesting a different name was considered earlier in the design process. You walk to the window. The city of London is quiet. The gas lights in the street outside flicker in the wind. You turn away from the window and follow the path to the shipyard. The location shifts to the banks of the River Lagan in Belfast. A massive steel gantry looms over the site. The structural frame of the first ship, the Olympic, rises from the ground, surrounded by thousands of tons of steel, echoing within the sound of pneumatic hammers driving hot rivets into place. You stand on the floor of the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast. The date is the 30th November 1911. The air is cold and damp, tasting of salt and coal smoke. Above you, the sky is a flat gray expanse. Your feet rest on packed earth and crushed stone. Directly ahead, the massive Arroll gantry rises into the air. It is a steel structure composed of vertical girders and horizontal trusses, spanning over 200 feet in height. It is wide enough to cover 2 separate slipways simultaneously, creating a permanent shelter for the construction projects underneath. You see the slipway previously used for the construction of the Olympic. A team of men in heavy wool trousers and thick leather aprons moves across the site. They carry heavy wrenches and steel plates. The sound of pneumatic hammers fills the air, a rapid, repetitive clatter that vibrates in your chest. The smell of burning coal rises from small portable stoves located near the base of the slipway. Each stove contains a pile of glowing orange coals used to heat metal rivets. A worker uses long-handled iron tongs to pull a white-hot rivet from the stove. He moves quickly, placing the glowing cylinder into a hole drilled through overlapping steel plates. Another worker strikes the end of the rivet with a heavy pneumatic hammer, flattening the cooling metal until it binds the plates together. The keel of the Britannic rests on a foundation of heavy timber blocks laid out in a straight line along the center of the slipway. The keel consists of several flat steel plates, each over an inch thick and several feet wide. You watch as a crane lowers a new section of the keel into place. The chains creak under the tension of the massive weight. The iron hooks engage with the steel lugs, and the plate settles onto the timber blocks. with a heavy thud that shakes the ground beneath your boots. Work continues across the entire length of the hull. Riveters climb wooden scaffolds that rise several stories high. The scaffolds consist of rough-cut timber planks lashed together with thick hemp ropes. The ropes are damp and smell of seawater. You hear the shouts of the foreman echoing against the steel plates. Men carry buckets of rivets, and the smell of hot, oxidizing metal hangs in the air around every workstation. You walk along the side of the growing structure. The steel plates are cold to the touch and covered in a thin layer of grease. You can see the faint markings of chalk lines and geometric measurements etched onto the surfaces. The hull begins to take its curved shape as plates are fastened together in vertical strakes. The sheer mass of the materials creates a sense of fixed permanence. Each plate weighs several tons, and thousands of rivets hold the assembly together. The shipyard operates on a continuous schedule. The light of the gas lamps illuminates the site during the early hours of the morning and the late hours of the evening. The sound of the shipyard never ceases completely. The hammering creates a steady rhythm that defines the atmosphere of the workplace. You see sparks fly from the rivets, bright orange pinpoints of light against the gray metal and the dark sky. The air is thick with smoke, coal dust, and the sharp scent of heating metal. The progress of the construction follows the planned sequence. The vertical frames and the ribs of the ship are erected one by one, rising from the keel to form the skeletal structure of the hull. Each beam is bolted into position. The workers move with practiced movements, familiar with the weight and the sequence of assembly. The space between the hull and the gantry becomes increasingly restricted as the ship grows in height and width. You watch a team of engineers verify the alignment of the framing. They use plumb bobs and long spirit levels to ensure the structure remains perfectly straight. The long, thin strings of the plumb bobs hang motionless in the still air under the gantry. The bubble in the glass vial of the level stays perfectly centered. The construction moves steadily forward, plate by plate, frame by frame, and rivet by rivet. The structure of the ship now reaches the height of your chest. You place your hand on the cold steel and feel the faint vibration from a hammer striking a plate further down the slipway. The hull sits firmly on the timber blocks, a massive concentration of steel and human labor. The shipyard prepares for the next phase of assembly, which involves the installation of the double bottom and the commencement of the internal plating. You move away from the keel as the shift whistles sound, signaling the end of the workday, and the construction team walks toward the shipyard gates, leaving the massive steel frame to wait in the cold Belfast air for the next day of labor. You stand inside the Harland and Wolff shipyard office. The date is the 15th of April 1912. The room is quiet. A single electric bulb hangs from a wire, casting a sharp, yellow light onto a wooden desk. A telegraph machine sits on the corner of the desk. The brass key clicks with rapid staccato taps. The operator reads the paper tape as it slides through the machine. His face is pale. The smell of ozone from the electrical contacts drifts through the room. He tears the tape off and lays it flat on the desk. You read the printed words. RMS Titanic has struck an iceberg and foundered in the North Atlantic. You walk out of the office and back into the shipyard. The air is cold. A light mist falls, coating the steel structures of the gantry in a thin sheen of water. The work on the hull of the Britannic has stopped. The hammers are silent. The pneumatic drills sit on the wooden platforms. Thousands of rivets lie in open crates, unused. The shipyard workers stand in small groups, talking in low tones. They look toward the harbor where the water reflects the gray sky. You look up at the hull of the Britannic. It remains unfinished, a skeletal structure of steel plates and iron ribs. The plates stop at the middle decks. You can see the open framing where the internal walls would have been installed. The ship is a hollow shell exposed to the rain and the wind. The silence of the shipyard is absolute. The usual sounds of grinding metal and heavy machinery are absent. You walk to the base of the slipway. The timber blocks supporting the keel are wet and dark. The mud around the foundation is soft and clings to your boots. You climb a wooden ladder that leads up to the main deck level. The surface of the steel floor is uneven and cold. You walk to the edge of the construction and look out over the river. The scale of the ship is evident in the length of the open deck. You touch the cold steel of the upright beams. These beams are designed to support the weight of the complete decks and the thousands of tons of machinery intended for the interior. In the coming days, the atmosphere in the shipyard changes. Men in heavy coats arrive with rolls of blueprints. They carry drafting tables and ink pots. They meet in the rooms beneath the gantry. They spread the drawings across tables and make marks with charcoal and ink. You see them measuring the distance between the existing bulkheads. You see them adding lines to the diagrams that extend these bulkheads higher into the structure. The shipyard issues new instructions to the assembly crews. They begin to bring in additional steel plates. The plates are thicker and heavier than the ones previously used. You watch as cranes hoist these new sections into place. The workers begin to fasten these plates to the existing framing. They weld additional brackets and reinforcements into the internal corners of the hull. They work with a new focus, spending hours ensuring each rivet is driven flush against the surface of the metal. You observe the installation of new equipment on the deck. The crew brings in crates containing davits. These are large, mechanical steel cranes with gear-driven motors. They mount these cranes along the perimeter of the deck, where the lifeboats will be stored. Each crane is bolted into the steel floor, and the electricians run heavy copper wires from the main power lines to the electric motors of the davits. You walk back to the desk in the office. A new set of plans covers the surface. These plans show the installation of 2 extra rows of lifeboats. The drawings specify the location of these boats and the mechanics of the launching system. The total capacity of these lifeboats is calculated in ink on the side of the page. The numbers indicate enough space for every person planned to be on board the ship. The work in the shipyard resumes. The pneumatic hammers start again, driving the rivets that fasten the new bulkheads and the new safety equipment to the steel frame of the ship as it sits in the shadow of the gantry. You stand inside the partially completed hull of the Britannic. The air smells of cold iron and grease. The floor beneath your feet consists of heavy steel plates riveted to the frame. You look to your left and right. The hull is wider here than in the initial design. You walk to the starboard side. You measure the distance to the outer shell. The steel hull is now double-walled, with a space of several feet between the inner and outer layers of plating. This double hull extends along the entire length of the engine rooms and the boiler rooms. The distance between the hull and the internal structure measures exactly 94 feet at the widest point of the ship. You look up at the watertight bulkheads. These vertical steel walls rise from the bottom of the ship, passing through the various decks. You follow the edge of the sixth bulkhead with your eyes. It extends upward, passing through the E deck and the D deck, reaching all the way to the B deck. The rivets holding these bulkheads to the ribs of the ship are larger than the ones used on the outer hull. Each seam is sealed with a thick layer of lead-based paint to prevent water seepage. You walk toward the center of the boiler room area. You see the heavy steel watertight doors. These doors are rectangular and made of thick cast iron. They are fitted into vertical tracks. You observe the electrical cables running along the ceiling, leading to the motors that operate these doors. The plans attached to the wall indicate that these doors can be closed from the navigation bridge. When closed, each door rests against a rubber gasket, creating a seal against the steel bulkhead. The structural reinforcement of these sections allows the ship to contain water even if 6 of the forward compartments suffer damage simultaneously. You move to the lower decks. The portholes are circular, made of thick glass set into brass frames. Each frame is bolted to the side of the hull. You turn the handle on one of the portholes. It rotates on a central hinge. When the handle is pulled tight, the edge of the brass frame presses against a soft gasket. These portholes are designed to be kept closed when the ship is at sea. You walk through the engine room. You see the massive steel base plates where the reciprocating steam engines sit. The foundations are reinforced with additional layers of steel to prevent vibration from weakening the structural integrity of the hull. You see the piping for the drainage pumps. These pipes connect to the bottom of every watertight compartment. The pumps are located on the upper levels of the engine room, allowing the crew to remove water from the lower areas of the ship if a leak occurs. The installation of these safety features occupies the labor of the shipyard for several months. You watch as the workers fit the internal walls of the bunker spaces. These bunkers are filled with coal, which provides an additional barrier against the outer hull. The steel ribs of the ship are spaced at closer intervals than in the previous vessels, providing more support for the outer plating. You see the welders finishing the final seals on the joints of the bulkhead structures. The ship continues to take its final form under the gantry. The work is precise. Every rivet is inspected by a foreman who marks each completed seal with a dab of red paint. You touch the cold, painted steel of the bulkhead. The surface is smooth and hard. You listen to the sound of water dripping from a leak in the roof of the gantry. hitting a metal plate on the deck with a metallic ping. The sound echoes in the vast, empty space of the hull. You look toward the boat deck. The workers begin to install the bases for the new gantry davits. These steel mounts are drilled directly into the deck plates and fastened with heavy bolts. Each mount is reinforced with an additional steel plate underneath to distribute the weight of the davits. You watch as the cranes lift the base units into position. The workers guide them onto the bolts, the metal clashing as the parts fit together. The structure of the ship is now prepared for the arrival of the lifeboats and the installation of the mechanical launching systems. You stand on the boat deck of the Britannic. The air smells of fresh paint and metallic dust. Above your head, the steel girders of the gantry provide a ceiling of dark iron. You walk to the starboard side. Mounted along the edge of the deck are massive steel structures. These are the gantry davits. Each unit consists of 2 vertical steel arms connected by a horizontal beam standing over 20 feet tall. A heavy electric motor sits on a platform at the base of each unit. Thick, braided steel cables run from the motor through a series of iron pulleys and down to the deck level. You inspect the design of the davits. The arms extend outward over the side of the hull. Attached to the arms are iron tracks. These tracks allow the davits to pivot and extend, swinging the lifeboats out from the stowage position on the deck to a point suspended over the water. You look at the electric control box attached to the motor housing. A heavy copper lever sits in the center. When pushed forward, the gears inside the motor housing engage with a low, grinding sound. You hear the hum of electricity moving through the copper wires. The lifeboats are stored in rows on the deck. Each boat is made of wood, painted white. They are secured to the deck by iron chocks. You walk past the boats. Each one measures 30 feet in length. You see the ropes coiled neatly on the deck next to each boat. The davit arms are positioned to lift these boats. One set of davits can handle up to 6 boats. The mechanics allow the crew to move each boat into position, one after the other. You see the iron hooks hanging from the cables. These hooks are designed to fasten to the metal rings on the sides of the boats. You count the davit sets along the deck. There are 5 sets installed in this section. The plans indicate that the total design called for 8 sets, but only these 5 are currently in place. The positions of these davits follow the line of the deck. Some are situated near the ventilation trunks of the funnels. You look at the clearance between the davit arms and the large steel funnels. The arms stand close to the structures. You turn your attention to the capacity of the lifeboats. Each boat is rated to hold at least 75 people. You look at the inventory list nailed to a wooden post on the deck. The list states there are 48 lifeboats stored on the ship. You perform the calculation on a small notepad. 48 boats multiplied by 75 people equals a total capacity of 3,600. The ship is designed to accommodate 3,309 people in total. The numbers confirm that there is space for every person on board, with room to spare. The workers continue to test the motor systems. You watch as a crew member moves the lever on the control box. The steel cables tighten. The davit arm pivots outward. It moves smoothly along the iron track. The arm stops at the edge of the deck, suspended over the drop to the slipway below. The motion is controlled and steady. The motor hums with a consistent pitch. You see the grease on the tracks glistening in the light of the electric bulbs. The installation of these davits creates a new visual profile for the boat deck. You walk to the aft section of the ship. The deck is clear of equipment here. The wind blows through the open spaces, carrying the scent of the river water. You look forward again, toward the bridge. The gantry davits stand at regular intervals, their steel silhouettes blocking the view of the funnels. You touch the cold metal of the track. The surface is smooth. The bolts holding the track to the deck are tight and painted over with gray primer. You walk down a companionway to the level below. The sound of the gantry fades as you move into the interior. You enter a room filled with crates. The crates are marked with the names of European cities. They contain the interior fittings for the passenger areas. You see the frames for the first-class staterooms, the panels for the grand staircase, and the boxes of hardware for the bathroom fixtures. The ship is prepared for the transition from a construction site to a luxury liner. But the internal spaces remain unfinished, filled with the raw materials of the cabin interiors. You walk through the wide double doors on A deck. The floor is covered in heavy, sound-dampening felt. The walls are lined with polished oak panels, each one cut and shaped to fit the curves of the steel bulkhead. You enter the first-class lounge. The room spans the full width of the deck. Large, rectangular windows look out onto the promenade. The frames are made of brass, and the glass is thick and clear. You see the layout for a grand salon, designed with high ceilings and decorative plaster moldings. The work of the carpenters is visible on the floor, where they have marked the positions for the mahogany furniture. You move into the adjoining veranda cafes. These rooms are designed with large windows that open outward to let in the sea air. The walls are covered in white trellis work, and the flooring is laid with red and white tiles. You walk to the space reserved for the smoking room. The walls here are lined with dark, carved wood. A fireplace built of marble and fitted with electric heating elements is installed against the forward wall. You touch the cold surface of the marble. It is smooth and polished to a high sheen. You step into the hallway that leads to the staterooms. Every door is made of solid wood with polished brass handles. You open one of the doors. Inside, you see the layout for a private bathroom. A porcelain tub sits in the corner with brass piping and valves connected to the wall. Beside it, a porcelain sink and a flush toilet are installed. The walls are tiled in white ceramic. The space is compact. You walk into the next cabin. It is fitted with large bed frames and closets built directly into the woodwork. Each room has an individual heating vent connected to the ship's central steam system. You return to the main hallway and approach the grand staircase. The wooden frame is under construction. You see the carved balustrades leaning against the wall, wrapped in thick paper to protect the finish. The plans show a central landing with a large clock at the top of the stairs. You look at the blueprints for the pipe organ intended for this landing. The document shows the size of the bellows and the layout of the keyboard. A note on the blueprint confirms the instrument was commissioned from a factory in Germany. You walk to the D-deck reception area. This room is finished in white painted wood paneling and gold leaf accents. You see the space allocated for the dining saloon. Long rows of tables are marked on the floor plan. The lighting system consists of electric sconces mounted on the walls and large glass chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. You stand in the center of the room. The air is still. The wood panels remain bare of paintings or mirrors. The space is ready for the furniture to be bolted down and the carpets to be laid. You look at a small, handwritten tag attached to a crate in the corner. The label says Britannic. You open the crate. Inside, you find a collection of brass pipes and wooden components for the organ. A factory stamp on one of the parts clearly displays the name spelled with a K at the end. You touch the cold brass. The parts are wrapped in oil-soaked cloth. These pieces will stay in this crate, stored in a dark corner of the shipyard, as the construction plans change to accommodate the war effort. You walk back toward the upper decks. You pass the empty staterooms and the silent reception halls. The luxury features are visible in their unfinished state. The plumbing for the private baths is connected to the water mains, and the electrical wiring runs behind the wood panels to the light fixtures in every room. You look through the windows at the Belfast shipyard. The rain falls against the glass, distorting the view of the gantry. The interior of the ship is a collection of high-end materials and precise engineering, but the cabins and the dining halls remain empty. You descend the companionway to the lower decks. The smell of the interior shifts from the polished wood and wax of the upper levels to the metallic scent of oil and steam from the engine rooms below. You follow the corridor toward the bulkhead doors. The luxury of the passenger areas ends, replaced by the utility of the working sections of the ship. You step through a heavy steel door and emerge into the boiler rooms, where the firemen are beginning to light the furnaces for the next stage of the ship's preparation. You stand on the deck of the Britannic. The date is August 1914. The air smells of wet soot and salt from the River Lagan. You look out over the shipyard. The activity has changed. The pneumatic hammers are no longer working on the cruise liner. Instead, you see crews of men installing heavy steel plates onto the sides of smaller vessels docked nearby. These ships are painted in shades of gray. You walk toward the office building. Stacks of raw materials sit in the yard. These are steel beams, iron chains, and brass fittings. Tags tied to the materials indicate they are destined for military contracts. You walk to the edge of the slipway. The Britannic sits in the center of the yard, anchored in place. The hull is complete, and the funnels stand against the sky. You see the white paint on the hull, but it is covered in a layer of grime from the smoke of the shipyard. No workers approach the ship. The scaffolding remains attached to the sides, but the wooden planks are slick with rain. You climb a gangway and step onto the promenade deck. It is empty. Dust has collected in the corners of the window frames. You walk toward the first-class entrance. The wood finish is dull. You touch the brass handle of the door. It is cold and damp to the touch. Inside, the halls are silent. The carpets have been rolled up and stored in crates. You hear the sound of the wind blowing through the open portholes on the lower decks. The air inside the ship tastes of stagnant water and cold iron. You walk to the grand staircase. The wooden structure is covered with heavy canvas sheets. You move through the dining saloon. The tables and chairs are missing. The floorboards are bare. You see rows of electrical wires hanging from the ceiling, connected to empty light sockets. You look out of the windows toward the shipyard gate. Men in uniforms move across the yard. They carry clipboards and leather satchels. They walk past the Britannic without stopping. The ship is an island of inactivity. You walk to the engine room. You place your hand on the steel casing of the turbine. The metal is cold. No steam flows through the pipes. No oil drips into the drip pans. The floor grating is covered in a thin layer of fine gray dust. You see a set of maintenance tools sitting on a workbench, left exactly where they were placed months ago. You walk back to the promenade deck. The light of the setting sun hits the funnels, turning the soot-covered paint a deep orange. You see the lights of Belfast flickering in the distance. The shipyard is active, but the labor is directed toward the construction of warships and patrol vessels. The Britannic remains at the dock. You walk to the railing and look down at the water. The surface is dark and calm. You hear the sound of a distant whistle, a long, low tone that drifts across the river. It is the sound of a transport ship departing for the harbor. You turn and walk toward the gangway. You step onto the stone pavement of the shipyard. You pass a row of storage sheds. Inside, you see thousands of tons of coal stacked in piles. These piles are meant for the boilers of the passenger liners, but they remain untouched. You see the crates containing the decorative panels and the furniture for the first-class staterooms. These crates are stacked to the ceiling, covered in thick layers of dust. The labels on the crates are fading in the dim light. You walk to the main entrance of the shipyard. A guard sits in a small wooden booth. He wears a dark blue coat and a flat cap. He writes in a logbook. He does not look up as you pass. You walk toward the street. The city of Belfast is dark. The street lamps are dimmed to conserve electricity. You hear the sound of marching boots on the cobblestone street. A platoon of soldiers turns the corner and moves toward the docks. They carry rifles over their shoulders. The metallic clink of their equipment echoes against the brick buildings. You stand on the sidewalk. The Britannic is visible over the shipyard fence, a massive, silent silhouette against the night sky. The ship waits in the dark, a finished vessel without a destination. The war has stopped the flow of trade, and the passenger routes across the Atlantic are closed. The ship sits at the dock while the world around the shipyard changes. You turn away from the shipyard and walk down the street toward the center of the city. You hear the sound of the soldiers' boots fade away, replaced by the sound of the wind blowing through the narrow alleyways. You arrive at the station where a train waits to transport you toward the Mediterranean region where the needs of the war are beginning to change. You stand on the deck of a transport ship in the Aegean Sea. The date is May 1915. The air is warm and smells of salt and exhaust fumes from the ship's funnels. You look toward the coastline of the Gallipoli Peninsula. The shoreline consists of steep, rocky cliffs and narrow beaches. You see smoke rising from the hills. The sound of artillery fire moves across the water, a series of low, rhythmic thuds that vibrate through the deck, plating under your feet. Small boats move between the shore and the larger ships anchored in the bay. You watch as these small boats reach the sides of the larger vessels. Men are lifted from the boats on stretchers. The stretchers are made of canvas, stretched over wooden poles. You see blood staining the white canvas. The men lie still or move with slow, labored breaths. They wear torn, dust-covered khaki uniforms. Their skin is caked with gray dirt. You smell the sharp odor of sweat, damp wool, and the coppery scent of dried blood. The crew members on the transport ships work to hoist the stretchers onto the decks. The ropes creak against the pulleys. You hear the voices of the medical staff calling out instructions. You walk toward the center of the transport ship. Every available space is filled with wounded soldiers. They lie on the wooden decks, on coils of rope, and in narrow passageways. The air is heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies and medical dressings. You see men with bandaged arms and legs, others with patches over their eyes or faces. Some soldiers hold cups of water to their lips with shaking hands. The medical staff moves between the wounded, carrying metal basins and rolls of gauze. You see the reflection of the sun in the metal instruments they use to clean the wounds. You look out at the surrounding ships. Most of them are small, converted vessels with limited capacity. They sit low in the water under the weight of the patients. You see a Cunard liner, the Lusitania, depicted in a newspaper clipping pinned to the wall of the ship's mess hall. The headline describes the vessel sinking near the Irish coast after being hit by a torpedo. You look at the image of the ship. The deck is tilted, and the funnels are angled toward the water. You turn your gaze back to the wounded soldiers on the deck. The number of casualties continues to rise. You see the small boats return from the shore again and again each time. They bring more stretchers and more men. The medical staff works without stopping. You watch a doctor perform a procedure on the deck. He wears a stained white apron. He uses a needle and thread to close a gash on a soldier's arm. You hear the sound of the soldier's shallow breathing and the clinking of the doctor's metal tools against a ceramic tray. The heat increases as the sun reaches its peak. You feel the sweat on your skin. You walk to the railing and look toward the open water. You think of the large liners sitting idle in the docks at home. Those ships have wide, open decks and massive internal spaces that remain empty. You look at the crowded conditions on the transport ship. You see the lack of space for operating rooms or proper medical wards. The current system relies on moving the wounded to smaller, nearby vessels, then to larger ships stationed further away. The process is slow. You see a soldier resting his head on a rolled-up coat. His eyes are closed, and his face is pale against the dark fabric of the uniform. You turn your back on the shoreline. The sound of the artillery fire continues in the distance. The transport ship prepares to move toward a staging area. You see the captain on the bridge, his hands on the brass wheel. He looks at the map spread out on the console. You walk toward the engine room. The heat increases as you descend the metal stairs. The smell of oil and fuel is strong. You stand near the turbine housing. The vibrations travel through your boots. You consider the capacity of the Britannic, currently resting in the shipyard in Belfast. The ship has the space, the layout, and the size to accommodate these wounded soldiers. You turn and walk toward the communication office, where a telegraph operator is recording a message for the Admiralty in London. You stand on the quay in Belfast. The date is the 13th November 1915. The air is cold and smells of river mud and fresh paint. A team of shipyard workers stands along the side of the Britannic, holding long-handled brushes and heavy buckets of white lead paint. They work in coordinated lines, covering the dark gray steel hull with a thick layer of white. Other workers climb wooden ladders, painting large red crosses on the side of the superstructure. They apply a horizontal green stripe along the hull, stretching from the bow to the stern. The name Hummus Britannic is painted in black, block letters on the bow. You walk onto the ship. Captain Charles Alfred Bartlett stands on the bridge. He wears a heavy blue wool coat with gold braid on the cuffs. He looks at a clipboard listing the modification completed in the interior. You follow him down the companionway to the D deck. The dining rooms and reception halls, which were previously fitted for luxury passenger use, now contain rows of metal cots. You see 309 beds bolted to the floor in groups of 4. Each bed is fitted with a white linen sheet and a gray wool blanket. Metal stands hold medical charts at the head of every cot. You enter the operating rooms. These spaces occupy the former first-class reception areas. The walls are covered in white enameled steel sheeting. Large, bright electric lamps hang from the ceiling on adjustable brass arms. You see stainless steel tables in the center of each room, equipped with drainage channels. Cabinets along the walls are filled with glass jars containing cotton swabs, rolls of bandage gauze, and sterile metal instruments. You hear the sound of the medical staff moving equipment into the rooms. The floor is covered with white linoleum that has been scrubbed clean. You walk through the corridors. You see the staff quarters. The medical team consists of 101 nurses wearing white linen dresses and fabric caps. They work alongside 336 non-commissioned officers and 52 commissioned officers. The ship's operational crew consists of 675 men. You see the men wearing standard naval uniforms, checking the steam valves and the electrical panels. You hear the noise of the stokers in the boiler rooms. They shovel coal into the furnace doors. The fires inside the boilers glow with a bright, intense orange light. The heat radiates through the steel walls of the boiler room and into the nearby corridors. The ship is fully equipped for long-range medical transport. You see the storage areas for food and medicine. The pantries are stocked with cases of tinned meat, crates of biscuits, and barrels of water. You look into the galley. Large iron stoves are fitted with racks for heating meals for over 3,000 patients. The smells in the kitchen consist of baking bread and boiling water. The medical staff begins to organize the patient flow marking the hallways with signs that indicate the surgery wards and the recovery areas. You walk back to the bridge. Captain Bartlett adjusts the compass. He looks at the charts for the Mediterranean route. The ship is now a hospital vessel, marked by the red crosses on the sides and the green stripe along the hull. The Admiralty signals have been received, and the ship is cleared for departure. You hear the sound of the anchor chain being hoisted into the storage locker, a loud, metallic rattling that echoes against the hull. The ship's engines begin to turn, and the vibration travels through the deck beneath your feet. You look out over the Belfast shipyard one last time as the Britannic pulls away from the dock. The white paint on the hull catches the morning light. You watch the green stripe pass the harbor wall. The crew, on the deck, stands at their stations, ready for the voyage to the Mediterranean. The vessel moves slowly into the open water of the Irish Sea. You hear the steady, rhythmic pulse of the engines. The ship is headed toward the ports of Naples and Lemnos, where thousands of injured soldiers wait for transportation. You stand at the railing, watching the coastline of Ireland fade into a thin gray line on the horizon. The journey of the hospital ship has begun, and the daily routine of mercy will start the moment the first patients are brought aboard. You stand in the ward of the HMS Britannic at 6 a.m. The air is cool and smells of floor polish and soap. The sun hits the white-painted steel walls of the ward, creating a bright, steady light. You hear the chime of a handheld brass bell. The nurses move through the rows of cots. They wear stiff white aprons and head coverings that rustle as they walk. They speak in low, steady voices. Each patient receives a basin of warm water and a clean towel. The men sit up in their iron cots. They wash their faces and hands. The sound of water splashing against the sides of the metal basins fills the ward. At 6:30 a.m., the orderlies push the wheeled carts down the center aisle. The carts carry large ceramic pitchers of hot milk and baskets of sliced bread. You watch as they pour the milk into mugs. The steam rises from the liquid, warming the air around the cots. The patients eat their breakfast. The sound of metal spoons against ceramic bowls creates a rhythmic clatter. You walk toward the medical office. You see Captain Bartlett walking down the corridor. He wears his naval cap and walks with a steady, measured pace. He stops at the entrance to each ward and observes the patient list held by the head nurse. He checks the status of the supplies and the cleanliness of the deck. The morning hours pass with the sound of metal instruments being cleaned. You watch the medical staff at work. They sharpen the needles on a whetstone and boil the metal forceps in a pot of water over a portable heating element. The smell of steam and boiled metal rises into the air. At 12:30 p.m., the orderlies return with the lunch carts. They serve plates of stew and soft bread. The patients who are able to walk move slowly toward the promenade deck. You follow them outside. The Mediterranean air is warm and smells of salt. The patients stand by the railing, looking out at the flat blue surface of the sea. At 4:30 p.m., the staff serves tea. They carry trays of china cups and plates of biscuits. The patients sit on the wooden chairs placed along the deck. The sound of quiet conversation drifts through the air. You watch next the nurse conduct a medical class in a small cabin. They use a mannequin to demonstrate the application of bandages and the proper method for cleaning wounds. They speak about the types of dressings to use for different injuries. The nurses take notes in small leather-bound books. They repeat the procedures until their movements are precise and fluid. At 8:30 p.m., the lights in the wards dim. The orderlies perform a second inspection. They check that every patient is in their cot and that the medical charts are current. The sound of the ship's engines remains a low, constant vibration through the deck. You walk to the upper deck. The night air is dark and clear. You see the stars reflecting on the surface of the sea. The ship moves forward at a steady speed. You see the shadow of the funnels against the night sky. You recall the details of the maiden voyage. The ship departed Southampton on the 23rd December 1915. It traveled to the Greek island of Lemnos. The route passed through the Strait of Gibraltar and across the Mediterranean Sea. The ship arrived in the harbor of Mudros Bay. You see the smaller vessels pulling alongside the Britannic. The stretchers are moved across the temporary wooden gangways. A total of 300 casualties are brought aboard. You see the nurses preparing the beds. The medical staff begins the process of registration. They record the names, ranks, and serial numbers of every soldier. You watch the patients settle into their cots. The ship departs the harbor. The heavy machinery begins to turn, and the vessel heads toward the port of Naples. The patients remain in the wards for the duration of the voyage. You see the nurses moving through the rows during the night, checking the pulse and the temperature of the men. The air remains warm. The routine continues throughout the trip. You look at the logbook in the medical office. The pages are filled with neat, handwritten entries documenting the recovery of the soldiers. The ship reaches Naples, and the patients are moved to the shore for further treatment at the base hospitals. The staff prepares the rewards for the next group of wounded, ensuring every cot is clean and every sheet is folded tight for the next voyage. You stand on the deck of the Britannic in June 1916. The sun reflects off the white-painted steel. The ship is docked at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast. The medical cots have been removed from the interior decks. You see workers carrying furniture, carpets, and wooden panels into the ship. They move along the gangways, filling the halls with the materials required to convert the vessel back into a passenger liner. The government payment of £75,000 covers the cost of this work. You watch as the workers screw the seats into the dining saloon and hang the curtains in the staterooms. The smell of sawdust and fresh wood stain fills the corridors. The project nears completion. You walk through the grand staircase. The wooden panels are polished and the brass fixtures are cleaned. The ship sits in the quiet of the harbor. You see the Admiralty officials walking on the deck. They carry folders filled with documents. You hear the sound of the workers exiting the ship at the end of the day. The sound of the shipyard is distant. The ship appears ready for service as a passenger vessel. With the luxury features reinstalled and the cabin areas fully furnished, You stand in the shipyard office on the 26th August 1916. An official hands a document to the captain. The Admiralty has issued an order for the immediate recall of the ship for hospital service. You see the workers return to the Britannic. They carry heavy tarpaulins and metal brackets. They begin the process of removing the passenger furniture. They take down the curtains and roll up the carpets. You hear the sound of hammers as they remove the bolted seats in the dining room and replace the metal cots in the wards. The air in the ship changes from the scent of wax and polish to the smell of dust and floor cleaner. You watch as the crew restocks the medical supplies. Crates of bandages, jars of medicine, and stacks of wool blankets are brought onto the ship. The nurses move into their cabins. The medical officers check the operating rooms. You see the workers repainting the green stripe along the hull, ensuring it is bright and visible. The red crosses are inspected for clarity. The ship is cleared for its return to the Mediterranean. You walk to the bridge on the 24th September 1916. The engine room telegraph is set to full speed ahead. The ship moves out of the harbor and into the open water. You count the successful voyages completed since the start of the service. There have been 5 round trips. Each voyage involved the transport of thousands of wounded soldiers from the Aegean region to the base hospitals in the United Kingdom. You see the logbook in the captain's office. Each page contains the date of departure, the number of casualties carried, and the arrival time at the destination port. The records show the ship arrived at Lemnos, Naples, and Southampton without incident. You walk to the engine room. You feel the consistent, steady rotation of the turbines. You see the pressure gauges in the boiler room showing the steam levels. The stokers maintain the fires with a steady rhythm. The ship cuts through the water. You see the white hull and the red crosses against the blue water of the Mediterranean. The crew is familiar with the routine of the voyage. You see the nurses preparing the wards as the ship approaches the port of Lemnos. The men are ready to load the stretchers. The system is efficient. You stand on the deck and watch the coastline of Greece come into view as the ship prepares to dock, beginning the work for its 6th voyage. You stand on the bridge of the Abenifmans Britannic. The date is the 12th November 1916. The time is 14:23. The ship is departing from Southampton. You feel the vibration of the engines through the deck plates. The white hull moves away from the dock. The smell of the harbor water, mixed with the coal smoke from the funnels, fills the air. You look at the chart spread out on the navigation table. A line drawn in black ink marks the path toward Gibraltar. The ship moves at a steady pace. You hear the deep, rhythmic thrum of the propellers turning under the surface of the water. You walk through the ship. The wards are empty of patients. The nurses stand by the doorways of the medical rooms. They check the alignment of the cots and the position of the medical instruments. The storage areas are filled with supplies. You see cases of bandages, rows of glass bottles, and stacked wool blankets. The orderlies stand at their stations. The ship proceeds south. You see the coastline of England fade into a thin gray line. On the 15th of November 1916, At midnight, the ship passes the Rock of Gibraltar. You watch the lighthouse on the shore. Its beam cuts through the darkness. The ship enters the Mediterranean Sea. The surface of the water is calm. The temperature of the air rises as the vessel moves toward the east. You see the crew adjusting the ventilation systems. The portholes are checked for a secure seal. The ship reaches Naples on the morning of the 17th of November 1916. You stand on the deck as the ship enters the harbor. The city of Naples is visible on the hillside. You see the stone buildings and the activity of the port. The ship docks at the pier. A team of workers begins the process of coaling. They use conveyor belts and large iron buckets to move the coal from the shore into the ship's bunkers. You hear the clatter of the coal hitting the steel chutes. A fine layer of black dust settles on the white paint of the deck. Fresh water is pumped into the storage tanks through heavy rubber hoses. A storm moves into the area on the afternoon of the 17th of November. You see the clouds turning dark gray over the mountains. The wind picks up, blowing across the harbor. Rain hits the surface of the deck. The captain decides to delay the departure. The ship remains tied to the pier. You watch the waves hitting the harbor wall. The temperature drops. The crew members stay inside the ship. You see the lights of Naples through the rain. The weather changes on the afternoon of the 19th of November 1916. The wind dies down and the clouds break. The captain gives the order to depart. You feel the ship pull away from the pier. The engines start with a deep, low rumble. The vessel heads out of the harbor. The water is choppy. The ship moves through the Strait of Messina during the night. You see the lights of the towns along the shore. The seas are heavy, but the ship maintains its course. You look at the compass on the bridge. The needle stays steady. By the morning of the 20th of November, the storm has passed. The sea is flat. The sun shines on the water. The ship continues on its path toward the Aegean Sea. You walk to the stern and watch the wake of the ship. The water is a deep blue. The air is warm and smells of salt. The ship approaches the Chia Channel. The crew prepares the wards for the arrival of the patients at Lemnos. You see the nurses unfolding the linen sheets and placing them on the cots. The orderlies verify the stock of medical supplies. The ship moves through the calm water, heading toward the narrow passage where a different set of preparations has been made in the darkness beneath the surface. You stand on the deck of a German submarine, the S-Man U-73. The date is the 28th of October 1916. The air is cold and smells of diesel fuel, damp metal, and stale air. The submarine sits low in the water. You look at the dark, flat surface of the Aegean Sea. The deck of the submarine is narrow and slick with spray. Several men in heavy wool jackets move along the deck. They surround a row of large, spherical steel objects held in place by iron cradles. Each sphere measures about 3 feet in diameter. They are painted dark gray. You see the protrusions on the surface of each sphere, which contain the triggers for the contact detonators. The crew works with practiced movements. They slide the spherical mines along the deck toward the stern of the submarine. You hear the scrape of iron against iron. A steel cable runs from each mine to a heavy iron anchor. These anchors are designed to hold the mine at a specific depth below the surface of the water. The crew secures the mines to a launching rail. You watch as they activate the release mechanism. The submarine moves forward at a slow speed. The mines drop from the stern one by one. You hear a splash as object hits the water and sinks from view. The submarine continues its path across the Kia Channel. The crew lays a line of these devices, spaced at regular intervals. You see the bubbles rising to the surface, marking the path where the mines have been dropped. The submarine turns and moves away, disappearing into the gray mist that hangs over the water. The mines drift down until the cable pulls the anchor to the seabed. The mines remain suspended at a fixed depth, hidden below the surface of the channel. They wait in the dark water. The current pulls at the steel spheres, but they stay tethered to the iron anchors on the floor of the channel. You walk to the edge of the Kia Channel. The water is deep and opaque. You see nothing on the surface to indicate that the mines are present. The channel is a busy shipping lane. Other vessels pass through this area, their hulls cutting through the water above the hidden spheres. You see the shadow of a patrol boat passing in the distance. The mines remain undisturbed. The steel shells slowly gather a layer of silt and marine growth. The contact detonators remain armed. The detonators are sensitive to the vibration of any large metal object passing nearby. The international conventions state that hospital ships are immune from attack. You see the white hull and the red crosses painted on the sides of such ships. You observe the green stripe that runs along the exterior. The law provides for safe passage for these vessels. However, the channel has become a location of military activity. Patrol boats move along the coast. Submarines patrol the deeper waters. The area is marked on the naval charts as a zone of combat. You see the lines of the shipping lanes intersecting with the locations where the mines were placed. You stand on the deck and look at the calm surface of the channel. The water temperature is 21 degrees Celsius. The wind is light. You hear the sound of the waves hitting the rocks on the nearby island of Kea. The hidden mines remain in their positions. They are silent, waiting for the vibration of a ship's propellers or the displacement of water caused by a large hull. You turn away from the water and look toward the horizon. You see the silhouette of a large ship approaching the channel. The Britannic is moving toward the exact coordinates where the mines were dropped weeks ago. You watch as the vessel enters the channel, its engines pushing it through the water toward the hidden steel spheres. You stand on the starboard boat deck of the Britannic. The date is the 21st November 1916. The morning sun shines from the east bright and yellow. The time is 08:12. The sea is calm and the ship moves at full speed. You hear the steady, rhythmic pulse of the massive steam turbines deep below the waterline. The vibration moves through the soles of your leather boots. The air smells of salt, roasted coffee from the galley, and the thin, sharp scent of coal smoke trailing from the funnels. You look around the deck. There are 1,066 people on board the ship. This total includes 673 crew members, 315 men from the Royal Army Medical Corps, 77 nurses, and the captain. Most of the people are inside the ship, eating breakfast or preparing for the morning medical rounds. You walk toward the forward section of the promenade. You see the white railing, the polished wooden deck planks, and the rows of lifeboats hanging from the gantry davits. The ship is navigating the Kia Channel. The island of Kia is visible in the distance, a brown and rocky landmass rising from the blue water. At exactly 0812, a heavy, muffled sound rises from the starboard side of the hull. It originates below the waterline between holds 2 and 3. The sound is a dull, hard thud that resonates through the steel structure. You feel the deck move under your feet. A sharp vibration travels up the steel pillars. You see the deck plates buckle slightly. Dust and soot fall from the ceiling of the promenade deck. A massive plume of water, mixed with pulverized steel and coal dust, sprays upward into the air on the starboard side, reaching the height of the lower decks. The ship jolts to a sudden stop in its forward motion, then resumes its momentum. You hear the sound of twisting metal. The ship leans to the right. You grip the wooden railing to stay upright. In the forward wards, the nurses and doctors drop their plates and trays. They move toward their stations. The clatter of falling metal objects echoes through the hallways. You hear the sharp, sudden hiss of steam escaping from broken pipes in the boiler rooms. In the aft section of the ship, the sound is fainter. Many of the crew members there continue their work. They assume the ship has hit a small boat or a piece of floating debris. You see them looking out the windows, searching the water for wreckage. They do not yet see the extent of the damage. The ship continues to cut through the water. The vibration of the engines is still present, though it has changed in tone, becoming heavier and more uneven. You walk toward the forward staircase. The angle of the floor is now tilted. You see the water starting to pool on the starboard side of the deck. It is dark and murky, carrying bits of debris from the damaged hold. The smell of high explosives and wet coal dust fills the air. You look toward the bridge. Captain Bartlett stands at the center console. His hands are on the wheel, and his eyes are fixed on the horizon. He is steering the ship toward the island of Kia. The distance to the shore is 3 miles. You watch the water churning at the side of the hull as the ship begins to turn slowly to the right. The transition from a routine morning to an emergency has occurred in less than 1 minute. You follow the sound of the emergency bells ringing through the corridors, calling the crew to their assigned posts as the ship begins its final passage toward the island. You stand in the lower sections of the Amace Britannic. The air is thick with the smell of seawater, oil, and escaping steam. You look at the steel hull plating between the second and third holds. A jagged, dark opening spans several feet. Seawater rushes through this gap, white foam churning as it hits the iron floor gratings. The noise of the rushing water is loud and constant, drowning out the shouting of the crew. You see the forward watertight compartments filling to the level of the deck. The water rises at a rate of several inches per minute. You walk toward the boiler room. The steel bulkhead door sits in its track. It is supposed to be fully closed, but a piece of debris from the explosion is lodged in the frame. The door remains open by several inches. You see the water flowing through this gap, moving from the flooded forward holds into boiler room 6. The water cascades over the top of the floor plates. You move back to boiler room 5. The watertight door between these two rooms has failed to latch completely. Seawater surges into the room, swirling around the base of the furnaces. The heat from the coal fires meets the cold seawater, creating a dense white fog that fills the space. You climb the metal ladder to the medical decks. The temperature here is warm. You see the open portholes along the side of the hull. Each brass frame is turned outward, catching the air. The nurses had opened these portholes earlier in the morning to allow fresh air into the wards. The lower edge of the open portholes is now only inches above the surface of the rising seawater outside. As the ship tilts to the starboard side, the water flows into the openings. You see the waves washing directly into the medical wards. The water spreads across the linoleum floor, moving under the iron cots and toward the central staircases. The ship is designed to maintain buoyancy with 6 of its forward compartments fully flooded. You look at the current status of the flooding. The first 4 holds are full. Boiler room 6 is full. Boiler room 5 is filling rapidly. The damage has reached the limit of the ship's engineering. The water flows into the lower levels of the hull, bypassing the vertical steel bulkheads that were designed to contain it. The open portholes act as secondary intake points, pulling the sea into the internal decks far behind the damaged section. You walk to the wireless room. The operator sits at his desk. He wears heavy headphones. He is tapping the brass key of the transmitter. You see the frayed ends of the antenna wires dangling from the ceiling. The explosion severed the main lines. The operator can send messages, but the receiver is silent. He hits the key repeatedly. He looks at the gauge on the wall, which shows response from the shore. The room is quiet except for the click of the transmitter and the low, rhythmic hum of the failing engine room. You step back out into the corridor. The floor is slanted at a sharp angle. You see the water rising along the base of the white painted walls. The ship continues its movement toward the island of Kia, but the speed of the flooding is higher than the speed of the vessel. You hear the sound of the steam pressure dropping in the lines. The ship is losing its power. You look toward the staircase. The water is now deep enough to cover the bottom step. The flow of the sea through the open portholes continues as the ship tilts further to the right. The physical reality of the situation is clear as the water reaches the next level of the decks, setting the stage for the captain's final attempts to save the vessel. You stand on the navigation bridge of the HMS Britannic. The floorboards are tilted at a noticeable angle toward the starboard side. Captain Bartlett stands at the center console. His hands grip the brass spokes of the wheel. He looks through the forward windows. The island of Kia sits 3 miles away. The terrain is composed of brown, rocky hills and thin patches of dry grass. Bartlett pulls the engine telegraph handles to the full ahead position. The vibration of the engines increases. The ship begins to turn to the right. The steering gear is broken, so he uses the engines to navigate. He increases the speed of the port shaft while reducing the speed of the starboard shaft. This differential power pushes the bow of the 882-foot ship toward the shore of Kiea. You look down at the deck. The water is now level with the B-deck. The speed of the ship forces more water into the open portholes. You hear the sound of the sea rushing into the internal compartments. The ship's bow sinks lower, pulling the forward section of the deck into the water. You walk to the chart room. The navigation tools are slid to one side of the table. You see the ship's position marked in pencil on the paper. The line indicates the shortest path to the shallow water near the beach. The rate of the sinking matches the rate of the ship's movement toward the land. You go to the wardrooms on the lower decks. The water has reached the ankles of the orderlies. Major Harold Priestley walks through the rows of iron cots. He carries a leather clipboard. He stops at each cot and speaks to the patients. He tells them to put on their life belts and head toward the boat deck. You see the men sitting up, reaching for the orange life belts stored under their mattresses. They pull the ties tight around their chests. The nurses assist the patients who are unable to move on their own. They carry them toward the central staircase. You hear the sound of boots and shoes on the linoleum floors. You walk to the chapel. The chaplain is at the altar. He picks up a heavy, leather-bound Bible from the lectern. He tucks the book under his arm and walks out of the chapel. He moves with a steady pace toward the upper decks. You follow him through the narrow corridors. The ship lists further to the starboard side. You have to lean against the wall to keep your balance. The smell of the ocean is now strong throughout the interior of the ship. You see the water reflecting the electric lights in the hallways. The lights flicker, dimming for a second before returning to full brightness. You reach the boat deck. The air is warm and clear. You see the gantry davits standing in rows. The lifeboats are being lowered from their racks. The crew members move the levers on the motors. The electric gears grind. The boats swing out over the side of the ship, suspended by the steel cables. You see the passengers and the medical staff waiting in orderly lines. The wind blows across the deck, carrying the smell of salt and the distant sound of the propellers turning in the water. You look forward. The bow of the ship is now partially submerged. The water level is at the base of the mast. The ship is moving toward the island, but the depth of the water is decreasing. You see the rocks along the shoreline of Kiea. The distance to the beach is less than a mile. You hear the sound of the engines churning the water, driving the vessel forward. The movement of the ship creates a wake that reaches toward the island. You see the shore clearly now. The captain keeps his eyes on the water ahead, waiting for the ship to reach the shallow area where he intends to run the vessel aground. The propellers continue to spin, creating a wake that flows toward the lifeboats currently being prepared for launching. You stand on the port side of the boat deck. The ship leans at a sharp angle. The wooden deck planks are slanted toward the water. Third Officer Francis W. Laws stands near the davit controls. He looks down at the water. The sea is 3 decks below him. He pushes the lever to lower a wooden lifeboat. The steel cables unwind from the pulleys. The boat descends toward the surface of the water. Another boat follows, descending on a parallel set of cables. You see people climbing into the boats from the promenade deck. They wear heavy wool coats and orange life belts. You look toward the stern of the ship. The propellers are partially above the waterline. The massive bronze blades are 30 feet in diameter. They rotate at high speed, churning the seawater into a white aerated foam. The churning creates a visible vacuum in the water. The two lifeboats descend into the ocean. The current created by the propellers pulls the boats toward the stern of the ship. The boats drift rapidly toward the spinning bronze blades. You see the people in the boats shouting and holding onto the wooden benches. Captain Bartlett stands on the bridge. He looks at the stern through binoculars. He sees the lifeboats moving into the path of the propellers. He pulls the engine room telegraph to the stop position. You hear the deep metallic clanging of the signal bell in the engine room below. The engineers pull the levers to disengage the turbines. The rotation of the propellers begins to slow. The blades continue to turn, carving through the water with force. You see the first lifeboat hit the outer edge of the propeller arc. The bronze blades strike the wooden hull of the boat. The boat disintegrates. The wood shatters into small splinters. The second boat follows into the blades. The bronze propeller shears through the side of the boat, breaking the wooden beams and the seats. You see bodies falling into the churned water. The foam is gray and white. You hear the sound of shattering timber and the shouts of the people in the water. 30 people disappear into the wake. The propellers finally stop rotating. The water around the stern becomes still. You see the debris of the two lifeboats floating in the sea. You walk to the railing and look down. The sea is quiet. You see the remnants of the lifeboats bobbing in the water. You look toward the bridge. Captain Bartlett remains at the wheel. The ship has stopped its forward motion. He looks at the water behind the ship. You see the remaining crew members on the deck. They stand near the davits. They watch the water where the propellers had been turning. The silence on the deck is sudden. You hear the sound of the wind blowing through the rigging and the flapping of the canvas covers on the remaining lifeboats. You turn and look toward the shore of Kia. The ship is stationary. It continues to list to the starboard side. You see the water creeping up the side of the hull. You walk toward the remaining davits. The crew begins the process of lowering the other lifeboats. They move with steady, precise actions. They attach the hooks to the lifeboats and check the lines. You see the people climbing into the boats. They sit quietly on the wooden benches. Each boat is lowered toward the water, one at a time. The distance between the deck and the water decreases as the ship continues to settle. You look at the stern. The propellers are now entirely above the water. They are dry and covered in salt crust. The bronze surfaces reflect the sunlight. You walk away from the stern and move toward the center of the boat deck. The ship is ready for the final evacuation. You see the crew members preparing the remaining lifeboats. The sequence of the sinking continues. The water level reaches the height of the boat deck, signaling the final stage of the disaster as the ship prepares for its descent beneath the surface. You stand on the starboard side of the boat deck. The time is 0850. The deck is tilted at an angle of 30 degrees. You see empty davits hanging over the side of the hull. The 35 lifeboats have been lowered into the water. They float in the Aegean Sea, packed with nurses, crew members, and medical personnel. You see the oars dipping into the blue water, moving the boats away from the sinking ship. The hull of the Britannic is mostly submerged. The white paint is stained with rust and dark streaks of oil. You walk toward the navigation bridge. The floorboards are slick with water. Captain Bartlett stands by the compass. He looks down at the D-deck. The water has reached the interior doorways. He picks up the whistle. He blows 2 long, steady blasts. The sound travels across the water, reaching the people in the lifeboats. He gives the order to abandon ship. You see the last of the crew members climb over the railing. They slide down the side of the hull and jump into the water. You climb over the railing yourself. The cold water reaches your waist. You swim away from the hull. You turn back and look at the ship. The Britannic is lying on its starboard side. The funnels are partially submerged. You see the forward funnel collapse. It hits the water with a loud splash. The metal of the funnel breaks against the deck. The second funnel follows, sliding toward the surface of the sea. You hear the sound of snapping steel cables and shattering glass. The ship dips deeper. The stern rises high into the air. The propellers are visible, pointing toward the sky. You watch the bow. It strikes the seabed. The water depth at this location is 400 feet. The ship measures 882 feet in length. The bow rests on the mud at the bottom, while the stern remains above the surface. The deck machinery breaks loose from the mountings. You see iron winches, wooden deck chairs, and canvas covers sliding into the water. They hit the surface one after another. You hear the sound of the metal hitting the sea, a series of rhythmic thuds. The time is 09:07. The stern of the ship slips beneath the surface. You see a whirlpool forming where the hull disappeared. Violet Jessup is in the water nearby. She wears a life belt. She sees the ship dip lower and lower. She watches the deck machinery fall into the sea. She swims toward a lifeboat. The water is 21 degrees Celsius. You see the bubbles rising to the surface. The ship is gone. Only debris remains in the water. You look at the surface of the sea. The water is covered in wooden planks, orange life belts, and fragments of white paint. You hear the sound of oars in the distance. The lifeboats are gathering the survivors. You see the men pulling people from the water. They lift them over the sides of the wooden boats. You reach the side of a lifeboat. Hands reach down and grab your arms. They pull you into the boat. You sit on a wooden bench. The seat is wet and cold. You see the other survivors sitting around you. They are shivering, their faces are pale. You look toward the horizon. You see the smoke from an approaching ship. The HMS Scourge is moving toward the site. You see the outline of the vessel against the sky. The crew on the lifeboat continues to row. You feel the rhythm of the oars. The sun warms your back. You watch the water where the ship sank. There are no signs of the Britannic. The sea is calm. You see the rescue ships drawing closer to the lifeboats, signaling the end of the emergency as the survivors prepare for the final count and the journey toward the shore. You sit on the wooden bench of a lifeboat as the rescue ships arrive. The HMS Scourge and the HMS Heroic pull alongside the clusters of floating boats. You see the sailors leaning over the railings, lowering rope ladders and canvas nets. Local Greek fishermen from the island of Kinea steer their wooden kayaks through the debris field. They use long poles to pull survivors from the water. You reach out and grab the rope ladder. Your hands are numb from the 21-degree water. You climb onto the deck of the HMS Scourge. Sailors hand you a gray wool blanket. You wrap the fabric around your shoulders. You see other survivors sitting on the deck, shivering under blankets. You look at the final count, the people on board. There were 1,066 individuals on the Britannic. 1,036 of them sit on the decks of the rescue ships. You count the number of empty spaces in the lifeboats that remain in the water. 30 people lost their lives in the sinking. This number is recorded in the official logbook of the HMS Scourge. The Britannic is the largest ship lost during the First World War. You watch as the rescue ships turn and head toward the harbor at Kia. The date is the 3 December 1975. You stand on the deck of a research vessel. Jacques Cousteau directs the operation from the bridge. The sonar screens display the contours of the seabed at a depth of 122 meters. You see the image of a massive object on the monitor. It is the hull of the Britannic lying on its starboard side. The ship is intact. You watch the remote-operated camera feed. The footage shows the white paint of the hull and the remains of the promenade railings. The ship is the largest passenger vessel on the ocean floor. The date is May 2025. You are on a dive support ship. A team of divers prepares to enter the water. They wear dry suits and heavy rebreather tanks. They descend toward the wreck. You watch the video feed from their helmet cameras. They reach the debris field. You see ceramic tiles from the Turkish baths scattered across the sand. One diver picks up a white tile with a blue floral pattern. He places it in a collection bag. Another diver swims toward the bow of the ship. He finds the ship's lookout bell lying in the sediment. He cleans the surface of the brass with a gloved hand. The name Britannic is engraved on the metal. You watch as the divers recover a portside navigation lamp. The glass is cracked, but the brass housing is complete. You see a pair of binoculars sitting on the seabed near the bridge window. The divers carefully lift these items and secure them to the lift bag. The lift bag fills with air and rises toward the surface. You wait on the deck of the support ship. The bag breaks the surface of the water. A crane operator hooks the line and lifts the collection container onto the deck. You stand near the container as it is opened. The smell of salt and old sediment is present. The lookout bell is placed on a padded tray. You see the scratches on the metal where it hit the seabed. The navigation lamp is placed next to it. The team members record the location of each find in their notes. The artifacts are transported to a secure location for cleaning and preservation. You walk to the edge of the ship. The Aegean Sea is calm and flat. The sun begins to set below the horizon. The water turns a dark shade of blue. You listen to the sound of the waves hitting the hull of the support ship. The wreck of the Britannic remains in the dark water at 122 meters deep. The lookout bell and the lamp are now on the deck behind you. You turn and walk toward the cabin. The ship's engines start. The vessel moves away from the sight. You look at the dark water for the final time. The investigation of the wreck is complete. The artifacts are recovered. You close your eyes. The motion of the ship becomes a slow, rhythmic sway. The sound of the waves is the only thing you hear. You drift into sleep as the ship travels through the night.
If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. Well, if you're asleep then, I guess you can't help it. Anyways, see you in the next video.